Today we'll discuss CMI's 2017 paper, and the first question is: positive integers a and b, possibly equal, are chosen randomly from among the divisors of 400. The numbers a and b are chosen independently, each divisor being equally likely to be chosen. We need to find the probability that GCD of AB is 1 and LCM of AB is 400. Now first we look at number of divisors of 400. Now we know that 400 is 25 into 16, so there will be 2 to the power 4 into 5 square. So we know that if we have any number n which is expressed as prime powers like p1 to the power a, p2 to the power b, p3 to the power c, number of divisors is given by a plus 1, b plus 1, c plus 1 and so on. So in the case of n100, number of divisors in the case of 400 is 4 plus 1 which is 5 and then 2 plus 1 which is 3. So in total we have 15 divisors of 400. Now it says two positive integers a and b are chosen from these 15 divisors and they can be possibly equal. So that means we can choose one number more than once. So we'll find total number of choices for AB. So total number of choices for A and B will be, so first we look at total number of choices for A. We have 15 choices for A, and the same way we have 15 choices for B. So altogether we have 225 choices. Now we need to find this probability that these numbers are chosen such that their GCD is 1. That means there is nothing common between A and B, and LCM of AB is 400. This simply means that A and B are coprime factors of this number n. So we are looking for coprime factors. Now how do we split 400, which is 2 to the power 4 into 5 square, in two coprime factors? So for coprime factors we know that each of these terms 2 to the power 4 and 5 square, they must go to either A or B. So that means for this 2 to the power 4 we have two choices, either it will go to A or it will go to B. In the same way 5 square, again we have two choices, either A or B. So we have two choices for 2 to the power 4, we have two choices for 5 square. So total number of coprime factors is simply 4. If we want to write coprime factors, then we can write them also. Suppose we have A and B. Now A can be 1, B can be 2 to the power 4 into 5 square. This could be 2 to the power 4, B could be 5 square, or we can reverse them. It could be 5 square and 2 to the power 4, or it could be 2 to the power 4 into 5 square, and here B could be 1. So we have four possible ways in which we can split this number n into coprime factors. So this required probability is favorable case, which is 4, upon total number of case, which is 225. So this probability is simply 4 upon 225. Now question number 2 is, find the volume of solid obtained when the region bounded by y equals under root x and y equals minus x and x equal to 9 is revolved around the x-axis. It may be useful to draw the specified region. So we are given two regions, y equals to under root x and y equals minus x. So we'll draw both the regions. So that's our coordinate axis with the origin. This is x-axis and this is y-axis. Now we'll draw this half parabola, which is y equals root x. And then we'll draw this straight line, which is y equals minus x. So this is y equals minus x. Now we need to revolve these two curves to form solid of revolution. Now we know that when we revolve this parabola, we'll get a paraboloid. And when we rotate this line, we'll get a cone. So what will happen is, since this cone till this point of intersection, it lies within this paraboloid. So up to this point of intersection, this volume of revolution, it will be this paraboloid. And after this point of intersection, since this region now is above this y equals to root x graph, thereafter we'll get this frustum of a cone. So this is our solid of revolution. First thing, we'll need to find this point of intersection. So this is y equals to root x and this is y equals x. So here there'll be 2 points of intersections, 0 and 1. So this point is basically x equal to 1. We need to find volume of this revolution from 0 to x equals 9. So somewhere we'll have this line which is x equals 9 and we need to find volume of revolution. Now we know that volume of revolution is given by this small cylinder whose radius is y and whose width is simply dx. So this volume will be dv1 plus dv2. Now dv1 is volume of this paraboloid part. So area of the circle is pi r square. So it is pi and then r in this case is y. So it will be pi y square into dx and this is y for parabola. So this is pi yp square dx from 0 to 1 plus, now from 1 to 9 it will be this y of line. So it will be pi y line square into dx. So now we'll simplify it. So this is from 0 to 1. Now what is y parabola? So there will be under root x square is simply x. So it will be pi x dx plus from 1 to 9 pi x square dx. Now this is pi. It will be x square upon 2 from 0 to 1 and here it will be x cube upon 3 1 to 9. So it will be pi by 2 and then here it will be 1 minus 0 and here it will be pi by 3 and then it will be 7 to 9 minus 1. So this area will be pi by 2 plus 728 pi by 3 which is 1459 pi by 6 square units. Now in the solution they have a different answer and I don't know why, because here it clearly says and the line y equals to 9 and in the solution they have solved it for x equals 4. So I don't know which one was correctly given in the examination. So if it is 9 then it is this answer. If it is 4 then all we need to do is we need to integrate it from 1 to 4. Now here the question is 10 mangoes are to be placed in 5 distinct boxes labeled U, V, W, X, Y. So we have 5 distinct boxes. So one of them is U, V, W, X and Y, and we have 10 mangoes. Now the question says 10 mangoes are to be placed in 5 distinct boxes. A box may contain any number of mangoes including no mangoes or all the mangoes. What is the number of ways to distribute the mangoes so that exactly 2 of the boxes contain exactly 2 mangoes each? Now it simply means out of these 5 boxes, exactly 2 boxes have 2 mangoes each. So that means we have 2 boxes containing 2 and 2 mangoes. What we'll do is we'll select which boxes have these 2 mangoes each. So out of these 5, we need to select 2 boxes. So first we'll select 2 boxes. Now 2 boxes out of 5, it can be done in simply 5C 2 ways. So now we have 2 boxes and in these 2 boxes we have 2 mangoes each. So suppose the chosen boxes are U and W. So U now have 2 mangoes and W also has 2 mangoes. Now we are left with 3 boxes and 6 mangoes. Now we need to distribute these remaining 6 mangoes in 3 boxes so that no box should have 2 mangoes. Because in the question it clearly says exactly 2 of them contains exactly 2 mangoes. One of the distribution could be 6, 0, 0. Other one could be 5, 1, 0. It could be 4, 1, 1. It could be 3, 3 and 0. So these are the 4 possible ways of distributing these remaining mangoes. Now 6, 0, 0. In how many ways we can distribute 6, 0, 0? So it can be done in factorial 3 divided by factorial 2 ways, that is in 3 ways. See, these 6 mangoes, they can either go to V or X or Y. That is the reason we have 3 cases. Now what about 5, 1, 0? Now these 3 distinct numbers can be arranged in 3 places in factorial 3 ways. So it can be done in 6 ways. 4, 1, 1, again 1, 4 and 2, 1. So again it will be factorial 3 divided by factorial 2. So again it will be 3 ways. And then 3, 3, 0 is again factorial 3 divided by factorial 2, which again is 3 ways. So these remaining 6 mangoes can be distributed in the remaining 3 boxes in altogether 15 ways. So the total number of ways in which we can distribute these mangoes to satisfy this given condition is 5C2 into 15, and 5C2 is nothing but 10. So it will be 10 into 15 and that should be 150. Now question number 4 is find all complex solution to this equation. We are given this equation which is x to the power 4 plus x cube plus 2x square plus x plus 1 equals 0. We'll take these 2 terms together and then these 3 terms together. So then we can write x to the power 4 plus 2x square plus 1 plus x cube plus x equals to 0. So here it will be x square plus 1 whole square plus, here we'll take x common and again it will be x square plus 1. So we can write x square plus 1 into x square plus x plus 1 equals to 0. So here x square equals minus 1 or x square plus x plus 1 equals to 0. Now we'll solve this first part, then the value of x will be plus or minus iota, and if we'll solve the second part, we know that this is standard solution for omega and omega square. Now question number 5 is, let g be a function such that all its derivatives exist. We say g has an inflection point at x naught if second derivative, that is g double dash, changes sign at x naught. Now there are 3 parts. What we'll do is, we'll start with the third part. Find all values of x naught for which this function has an inflection point. So this function is your gx. So gx is x to the power 4 into x minus 10. We can write gx as x to the power 5 minus 10 x to the power 4. Now g dash x will be 5x to the power 4 minus 40x cube. And if we find its second derivative, g double dash x will be 20x cube 120x square. Now we can take 20x square common. Now here will be x minus 6. Now the points where g dash x is 0, they are x equals 0 and x equals 6. Now since there is an even power on x square, there will be no sign change at x naught, and then there will be the sign change at x equals to 6. The only point where this function is going to have a point of inflection is x equals 6, and that is the answer to this part C. Now the first part is, if g double dash x is 0, then g has an inflection point at x naught. We have to find whether this is true or false. Now in the previous example, at x equals to 0, g double dash x is 0, but still at x equal to 0, it is not a point of inflection. So that means this statement is false. And in general, when we say second derivative is 0, it doesn't mean there is a point of inflection. It simply means that second derivative test fails. There could be a point of maxima or a minima, or it could be a point of inflection. So first one is definitely false. Now what about the second one? If g has an inflection point at x naught, then g double dash x naught is equal to 0. Now for any general function, this statement may not be true. We can take up an example. Say for example, suppose we have any function and this is your point x naught. At x naught, this function is not differentiable. Now, before x naught, second derivative, it is negative because it is concave down, and after x naught, this is concave up. Here x naught is a point of inflection, and at x naught, second derivative is not zero. But in this question, it is given that g is a function such that all its derivatives exist. Now for this function, if all the derivatives exist, then its second derivative will be continuous. And if the second derivative is continuous, then this product, it is less than zero. Then g dash x changes sign from either positive to negative or negative to positive. So it simply means that at x naught, second derivative must be zero. So for general function, it may not be true, but for this given condition, this statement will be true. So answer will be false, true, and point of inflection for this function x to the power 4 x minus 10 is at x equals 6. Question number 6 is, consider the following construction in a circle. Choose points ABC on the given circle such that angle ABC is 60 degrees. Draw another circle that is tangential to the chords AB, BC and to the original circle. Do the above construction in the unit circle to obtain a circle S1. Repeat the process in S1 to obtain another circle S2. What is the radius of S2? So in this question, we have a circle. And in this circle, we have a triangle ABC. Now we have another circle which touches these two sides AB and BC and which also touches this given circle. So this is our circle, and suppose we join these points. Now let the center of this circle be O, and let the center of this smaller circle be O dash. Now in the question it says angle ABC is 60, so that means this angle is 30 degrees. Suppose this radius is capital R and radius of this smaller circle is small r. Now we know that this is R, this also is R, and this distance is small r. Then we can write this distance from B to O dash, and this distance will be 2R minus R. Now in this right angle triangle, we can write sine 30. So sine 30 will be R upon 2R minus R. Now we know that value of sine 30 is 1 by 2. So we can write 2R equals 2 capital R minus R. So value of small r is 2R by 3. So if the radius of bigger circle is 1 unit, then the radius of this smaller circle will be 2 by 3 units. Now if the process is repeated again, then in that case, then for that also this equation will be valid. So then we can write R dash will be equal to 2 by 3R. Then it will be 2 by 3 into 2 by 3, and that is 4 by 9. So radius of this smaller circle S2 is 4 by 9 units. Now question number 7 part A is, we are given this integral which is from minus 3 to plus 3 mod of 3x square minus 3 dx. Now we can take this 3 out. Then we can write from minus 3 to plus 3 mod of x square minus 1 into dx. Now this mod x square minus 1 is an even function. It will be 6 times 0 to 3 mod of x square minus 1 into dx. Now between 0 and 3 definition changes at 1. So we can split it in two parts. So it will be 6 times 0 to 1 1 minus x square dx plus 6 times 1 to 3 x square minus 1 into dx. So we can write this as x minus x cube upon 3 from 0 to 1 and then plus 6, and it will be x cube upon 3 minus x from 1 to 3. Now here it will be 1 minus 1 by 3, and this one will be 27 minus 1 So it should be 26 by 3 and then minus 3 plus 1. So it will be minus 2. We need to find f dash 1 where ft is this integral mod of 3x square minus 3 dx. We'll differentiate using Newton-Leibniz formula. So we'll write f dash t and then in place of x we'll write t. So there'll be 3t square minus 3 into derivative of t, which is 1, minus derivative of 0 is simply 0. So from here we can say f dash t will be mod of 3t square minus 3. Now we need to find the value of f dash 1. So we'll put t as 1, then the value of this derivative is 0. So the value of f dash 1 is simply 0, and that is the answer to this question. Now question number 8 is, let f be a continuous function from R to R such that for every natural number n, fn equals smallest prime factor of n. So when we say f12, the smallest prime number that divides 12 is 2. In the same way, for f105, now 105 it is not divisible by 2 but it is divisible by 3. So f105 will be 3. Now this is the behavior of the function at natural numbers. But what about at other points? Now it is given that this f will be a continuous function from R to R. So it is defined for all real numbers. When the value of x is 2, the value of function will be 2. When the value of x is 3, it will be 3. When the value of x is 4, it will be 2. Now since this function, it is a continuous function, then we do not know the nature of the function. At least what we know is from intermediate theorem, we can say that it will take all the values between 2 and 3. In the same way, here also between 3 and 4, it will take all the values between 2 and 3. Now we'll come to this first part and it says, we need to find this limit, which is limit x tends to infinite fx. If we take any even number in the neighborhood of infinite, this limit, it goes to 2. And if we take any prime, say p, in the neighborhood of fx, then this limit will go to p. So this limit at infinite, it will have many oscillating values. So there is no finite limit. So basically, limit for this function at infinite does not exist. Now, second question is, we need to find number of solution to fx equals 2016. Let there be some point and let this point be x equals 2016. Now if we take any prime number p, which is greater than 2016, we know that value of fp will be p. So we'll get some value which is p, and this value will be greater than 2016. Now what about fp plus 1? Now fp plus 1 will be an even number, and if it is even, this value will be 2. So at p plus 1, this value is 2. Now this function is continuous. It will take all the values between 2 and p. So there is at least one solution between p and p plus 1, and there will be infinite primes which are greater than 2016. So in this way, there will be infinite points where the value of fx is 2016. So number of solution to this equation is simply infinite. Now question number 9 is, consider the following function fx equals x square cos 1 upon x when x is unequal to 0, and it is a when x is equal to 0. So we need to find the value of a for which this function is continuous. So we know that this function will be continuous at 0 if f of 0 is equal to limit x tends to 0 x square cos 1 upon x. Now value of f0 is nothing but a. So it will be a equals, and this limit x tends to 0 x square cos 1 upon x. Now first thing that we do in any limits is to find its form. So we'll put x as 0, it will be 0, and then into cos infinite. Value of cos infinite is oscillating value between -1 and +1. And 0 into anything finite is 0. So value of this limit is 0. So from here we can say this function will be continuous if the value of a is 0. Now we'll come to its second part. We'll need to find its f dash 0. So we know that f dash 0 will be equal to limit h tends to 0 f 0 plus h minus f0 upon h. So we can write this as limit h tends to 0. Now what is f0 plus h? It will be h square cos 1 upon h minus 0 upon h. Now here h and h, it will cancel. So we'll get this limit as limit h tends to 0 h cos 1 upon h. Now this again is 0 into cos infinite, which is oscillating value between minus 1 and 1. So again this is 0. So the value of f dash 0 is simply 0. Now the third part is we need to find this limit, which is limit x tends to 0 f dash 0. So actually it should be limit x tends to 0 f dash x. I don't think they should write f dash 0 here. We'll differentiate this function. Then we can write f dash x as x square. Now derivative of cos is minus sine 1 upon x and minus 1 upon x square plus 2x cos 1 upon x. Now here x square will cancel. We'll get this f dash x as sine 1 upon x plus 2x cos 1 upon x. Now if we take this limit x tends to 0, this is again 0 into cos infinite, so it will be 0. But here we'll get this as sine infinite, which is oscillating value from minus 1 to 1. So in this case, this limit does not exist. So this is how we solve such questions. Now question number 10 says, we need to answer these 4 questions as yes or no. Now is it possible to find a 2 cross 2 matrix M for which this equation mx equals p has, so we'll choose this equation as a, b, c, d and then say uv and this is equal to say p1 and p2. Now say this matrix is M. This is X and this is P. So we can express this equation as Mx and it is equal to P. Now solution to this equation will depend on M. If determinant of M is unequal to 0, then in that case this equation will have a unique solution, and if determinant of M is 0, then we may have no solution. Or now in all the 4 parts, M is fixed and P varies. Now the first one is, can it have no solution for some and exactly one solution for all other P's? So we know that if it has no solution, then determinant of M will be 0, and for exactly one solution, determinant of M should be unequal to 0. So for a fixed M, either it will have a unique solution or it will have either no solution or infinitely many solutions. For a fixed M, it cannot have both, or it cannot have only unique solution or no solution. So that means this one is not true. B is exactly one solution for some but not all P, and more than one solution for all the P's. So that means, can it have a unique solution and infinite solution? No, it is not possible again, because again this one is not true. Now for no solution and more than one solution, for both of them, condition on M is same. That is, determinant of M should be 0. So if we choose values of A, B, C, D so that this determinant is 0, then for some values it will have no solution, and for some values it will have infinitely many solutions. So that means this option C is possible, and therefore this is yes. And the last one is no solution for some, unique for some, and infinitely many for some. No, it is not possible, because once we fix M, then it will be either of these two cases. That is, determinant will be either 0 or non-zero. So that means this one is again no. So answer to this question is no, no, yes and no. Now question number 1 is evaluate this limit. So we are given this limit, which is limit x tends to 0 positive x to the power x minus x to the power x. Now first we'll separately calculate this limit, which is limit x tends to 0 positive, x to the power x. So we can write this as limit x tends to 0, e to the power log x to the power x. We can write this as limit x tends to 0, e to the power x log x. And we can also write it as limit x tends to 0, e to the power log x upon 1 upon x. Now this is infinity upon infinity form. So we can use L'Hopital's rule. So we'll differentiate. So we can write limit x tends to 0, e to the power 1 upon x upon minus 1 upon x square. So it will be limit x tends to 0, e to the power minus x, and e to the power 0 is simply 1. So value of this limit x tends to 0, x to the power x is simply 1. So we'll solve this limit. And I think in the question they should have given this x to the power x. So we'll put this limit, then it will be 0 to the power 1 minus 1. So answer to this limit in that case will be minus 1. Now for part B, we are given that this a is 2 pi by 9. So we can write this as 1 plus cos 2 pi by 9 plus cos 4 pi by 9 plus cos 8 pi by 9 plus cos 10 pi by 9 plus cos 14 pi by 9 plus cos 16 pi by 9. Now what we'll do is, we can also write this as 1 plus cos 2 pi by 9 plus cos 4 pi by 9 plus cos 8 pi by 9. Now this is cos 2 pi minus 8 pi by 9. So it will be cos 2 pi minus 8 pi by 9. Cos 14 pi by 9 will be cos 2 pi minus 4 pi by 9. And in the same way, cos 16 pi by 9 will be cos 2 pi minus 2 pi by 9. Now we know that cos 2 pi minus theta is simply cos theta. So it will be cos 8 pi by 9. This one will be cos 4 pi by 9. And this last one will be cos 2 pi by 9. So we can write this as 1 plus 2 into cos 2 pi by 9 plus cos 4 pi by 9 plus cos 8 pi by 9. Now we'll use cos C plus cos D, taking these two together. So we can write 1 plus 2 into, so it will be 2 cos C plus D by 2. So it will be 10 pi by 18. So it will be simply cos 5 pi by 9. And then if we'll subtract, we'll get 6 pi by 18. So it will be cos pi by 3 plus cos 4 pi by 9. Now cos pi by 3 is simply 1 by 2. So this 2 and 2 will cancel. So we'll get 1 plus 2, and it will be cos 5 pi by 9 plus cos 4 pi by 9. Now these two angles, they are supplementary angles. So we can write cos 4 pi by 9 as cos pi minus 5 pi by 9. And cos pi minus theta is minus cos theta. So it will be minus cos 5 pi by 9, so which will cancel. So answer to this part B is simply 1. Now this third part is, we need to find number of solutions to this equation, which is e to the power x equals x upon 2017 plus 1. So what we'll do is, we'll write this function fx as e to the power x minus x upon 2017 minus 1. Now this function, it is continuous and differentiable. So we'll find f dash x. So its f dash x will be e to the power x minus 1 upon 2017, and its second derivative will be e to the power x. Now second derivative is positive. It simply means this function will be concave up. So this graph, it will be a concave up graph. Now when we have a concave up graph, we have three possibilities. Either this graph and x-axis neither touch nor intersect. In that case, there will be no solution. Or this curve and x-axis, they touch at one point, then it will have one solution. Or they intersect at two distinct points. In that case, it will have two distinct solutions. So in order to distinguish between all these three conditions, what we'll do is we'll find minimum value of this function. So we know that f dash x will be 0 at e to the power x equals 1 upon 2017, that is when the value of x is minus log 2017. Now since second derivative is positive, so we know that this point is point of local minima. So we'll find the value of this function at minus log 2017, then we'll get e to the power minus log 2017 minus plus, so it will be plus log 2017 upon 2017 and then minus 1. Now this value is 1 upon 2017, so we can write 1 plus log 2017 upon 2017 minus 1. So we can write this as log 1 plus 2016 minus 2016 upon 2017. Now we know that log 1 plus x is less than x whenever x is greater than 1. So in that case, this expression will be less than 0. So that means this function, it takes a negative value. And when function takes a negative value, that means it will intersect the x-axis at 2 points. So number of solution to this equation is 2. Now question number 2 is, let L be the line of intersection of planes x plus y equals 0 and y plus z equals 0. So we have two planes, x plus y equals 0 and y plus z equals 0. So this is x plus y equals to 0, and suppose this is y plus z equals to 0, and then we have this line of intersection. Now since line of intersection, it lies in the plane, so this line of intersection will be perpendicular to the normal of this first plane, and it will also be perpendicular to the normal of second plane. Now basically when we have a vector which is perpendicular to two given vectors, we use cross product. We can find direction ratios of this line as this determinant ijk and then n1. What's n1? It is 1, 1, 0, and then n2. n2 is 0, 1, 1. So we'll get this n as I minus j plus k. So vector in the direction of this line, it is given by I minus j and plus k. Now we need one point on this line. Now since both the planes, they pass through origin, so this line will also pass through origin. So now we can write this equation as r equals a plus lambda b. Now a in this case is this point which is 0i plus 0j plus 0k and then plus lambda, and b is direction of this line which is I minus j plus k. We can also write this equation in this form. We can write this L as this point which is 0, 0, 0 plus lambda, and then these direction ratios 1, minus 1 and 1. That is the equation of this line of intersection. Now part B is we need to find equation of a plane obtained by rotating x plus y equals to 0 about L by 45 degrees. So we have this plane which is x plus y equals 0, and we rotate this plane by an angle 45 degrees. Now we know that equation of plane passing through line of intersection of two given planes is given by p1 plus lambda p2 equals to 0. So we can write equation of this plane as x plus y plus lambda y plus z equals to 0. Then equation of this plane will be x plus 1 plus lambda y plus lambda z equals to 0. Now the direction ratios of this plane are 1, 1 plus lambda and lambda. Now direction ratios of the plane represented by x plus y equals to 0 is 1, 1, 0. So we can write cos theta, which in this case is cos 45, and it'll be a1 a2 plus b1 b2 plus c1 c2 upon under root of a1 square plus b1 square plus c1 square into under root of a2 square plus b2 square plus c2 square. So we can write this as a1 a2 plus b1 b2 plus c1 c2 upon under root of a1 square plus b1 square plus c1 square into under root of a2 square, b2 square and c2 square, which will be root 2. Now cos 45 again is 1 by root 2. So this root 2 will cancel. Now we can square it. We can write 2 plus lambda square and it will be equal to 1 plus lambda square plus 2 lambda plus lambda square. So it will be 4 plus 4 lambda plus lambda square, and on the right hand side it will be 2 plus 2 lambda plus 2 lambda square. So we'll get this quadratic equation, and there will be lambda square minus 2 lambda minus 2 equals to 0, which we can write lambda minus 1 whole square equals 3. That is, the value of lambda will be 1 plus minus under root 3. Now once we have value of lambda, we can write equation of the plane in the new configuration. So now the equation will be x plus, now what's 1 plus lambda? It will be 2 plus minus under root 3y plus 1 plus minus root 3z equals to 0. There will be two such equations depending on whether we have rotated the plane clockwise or we have rotated the plane anti-clockwise. Now question number 3, it says let px be a polynomial of degree strictly less than 100 such that it does not have x cube minus x as a factor if 100th derivative of px upon x cube minus x is equal to fx upon gx. We need to find smallest possible degree of fx. Now we know that this px is a polynomial of degree less than 100. We are also given that this px is not divisible by x cube minus x. So we can write px as x cube minus x into qx plus rx, where degree of qx, it is less than 100, and degree of rx, it is less than or equal to 2. Now we can write this as px upon x cube minus x, it will be qx plus rx upon x cube minus x. Now degree of rx is 2 or less than 2 and degree of denominator is 3. So we can use partial fractions. So we can write this as px upon x cube minus x will be equal to qx plus some a upon x, b upon x minus 1 plus c upon x plus 1. Now we need to differentiate this 100 times. So we can write this as d100 dx to the power 100 px upon x cube minus x, and let it be some expression, say e, and it will be equal to now 100th derivative of qx. Qx is a polynomial whose degree is less than 100. So we will differentiate qx 100 times, then its derivative will be 0. Now what about a upon x? So we will differentiate it once. It will be minus 1 upon x square, second derivative, plus 2 upon x cube, third derivative, 1 into 2 into 3 upon x to the power 4. So we will differentiate it 100 times. Then we can write its derivative as a into factorial 100 upon x to the power 101. In the same way, it will be b into factorial 100 upon x minus 1 to the power 101 and plus c into factorial 100 upon x plus 1 to the power 101. So this e, it will be factorial 100 a upon x to the power 101 b upon x minus 1 to the power 101 plus c upon x plus 1 to the power 101. Now we need to find smallest possible degree of fx. Now a, b, c, all of them, they cannot be simultaneously 0, because in that case, this px, it will be divisible by x cube minus x. And the question, it says x cube minus x is not a factor of px. So all these three a, b, c, they cannot be 0. Then we have two different cases. Case 1, suppose two of them, they are 0, and say the third one is non-zero. So one of the case could be when a and b, they are 0 and c is unequal to 0. Then we can write this e as factorial 100 into c upon x plus 1 to the power 101. Now we'll write it in the form fx upon gx. In that case, degree of fx will simply be 0. Now, what does this condition mean? This condition simply means that px, it is divisible by x. It is divisible by x minus 1, but it is not divisible by x plus 1. So, it is divisible by two of the factors, but not by this entire expression, which is x cube minus x. And in that case, degree of fx will simply be 0. Now, if we assume that x cube minus x, it doesn't divide p, in that case, we'll consider the case when a is unequal to 0, b is unequal to 0, and c is unequal to 0. In that case, we can write this e as factorial 100 a into x square minus 1 to the power 101 plus b into x square plus x to the power 101 and plus c into x square minus x to the power 101 divided by x cube minus x to the power 101. Now we'll use binomial theorem to simplify these expressions. We can write this e as factorial 100 and it'll be a 101 c0 x to the power 202 minus 101 c1 x to the power 200 plus 101 c2 x to the power 198 and all other terms. In the same way, for b we can write b 101 c0 x to the power 202 plus 101 c1 x to the power 201 plus 101 c2 x to the power 199. And again for c we can write 101 c0 x to the power 202 minus 101 c1 x to the power 201 and plus 101 c2 x to the power 199 upon x cube minus x to the power 101. Now we'll take the terms of 202 together, x to the power 200 together and x to the power 201 together. So we can write this e as factorial 100 upon x cube minus x, and it will be a plus b plus c 101 c0 x to the power 202, and then we can write plus 101 c1 x to the power 201 b minus c, and then minus a into 101 c1 into x to the power 200. Now if we choose ABC so that a plus b plus c is 0 and b minus c is 0, that is when the value of b is equal to c and then a plus 2b equals to 0, then in that case this term will be 0, this term will be 0, and here a, it cannot be 0. In that case, the minimum degree of fx will be 200. So for the second case, degree of fx will be 200. Now the fourth question is, we are given a function f such that its domain is set of natural numbers. A function f is defined as fn equals n plus greatest integer function of square root of n. Now we'll need to prove that for every natural number m, the following sequence, which is m, fm, f square m, f cube m, it contains at least one perfect square. And here this notation fk denotes composition of f with itself k times. That is, f square is simply f composition f. Now we'll consider this first case when this m itself is a perfect square. Now if m is a perfect square, it's a trivial case. It satisfies this given condition that this sequence contains at least one perfect square. So we'll consider the second case when m is not a perfect square. Now if m is not a perfect square, then m will lie between two perfect squares. Say it lies between k square and k plus 1 square. So what we'll do is, we'll say, suppose this m is some k square plus I, where the value of I is an integer that lies between 1 and 2k, both 1 and 2k included, because if it is 2k plus 1, then it will become k plus 1 square. So if we choose this m as k square plus I, where I lies between 1 and 2k, then we have a number which lies between these two perfect squares. Now we'll write fm. So fm will be m plus greatest integer function of square root of m. So it will be fm, and then m is k square plus I, and then it is greatest integer function of square root of m. So square root of m will lie between k and k plus 1. So its greatest integer function will be simply k. We'll get fm as k square plus k plus I. Now we'll find f square m. Now f square m is f of fm. So it will simply be fm plus greatest integer function of under root fm. So here it will be k square plus k plus I, and then plus greatest integer function of under root of k square plus k plus I. Now here we have to take two cases. When this value of I is greater than k plus 1, or if this value of I is less than k plus 1. If the value of I is less than k plus 1, then in that case, this number will be less than k plus 1. So we'll get this greatest integer function as k, and if we'll take I as greater than or equal to k plus 1, then this number will lie between k plus 1 and k plus 2. In that case, we'll have this greatest integer function as k plus 1. So we can take any one case. So suppose we'll take this case when the value of I is less than k plus 1. So in that case, we can write f square m as k square plus k plus I, and then here it will be simply k. So what we'll do is, we'll add 1 and subtract 1, then we can write k plus 1 whole square plus I minus 1. So we get this f square m as k plus 1 square plus I minus 1. Now we'll find f3m. f3m will be f square m plus greatest integer function of under root of f square m. So here it will be k square plus 2k plus I, and then what is greatest integer function of square root of f square m? Now here f square m is k plus 1 square plus I minus 1. Now if I is equal to 1, then this f square m is a perfect square which satisfies our condition. And if I is greater than 1, then f square m is greater than k plus 1 square. In that case, greatest integer function of square root of f square plus m will be simply k plus 1. So we'll get this as k square plus 3k plus I plus 1. In the same way, we'll find f4m. There will be k square plus 3k plus I plus 1 and then square root of this value. Square root of this value again will be k plus 1. So we can write this as k square plus 4k plus 2 plus I. Now we'll add 2 and subtract 2. Then we can write this is k plus 2 square plus I minus 2. So if we continue in the same way, then we can write f 2im as k plus I square plus I minus I. Now this I minus I will be 0. Then in that case, this f2im, it will be a perfect square. So if we'll choose I as 1, then f square m, it will be a perfect square. If we'll choose I as 2, then f to the power 4m will be a perfect square. And if we'll choose any general I, then f to the power 2i will be a perfect square. And in the same way, we can repeat the analysis when I is greater than k plus 1. So from here, we can say that for every natural number m, the following sequence contains at least one perfect square. And this is how we solve this question. Now question number 5, it is an interesting puzzle sort of a question. And the question is, each integer is coded with exactly one of the three possible colors, black, red, or white, satisfying the following two rules. Now the first rule is negative of a black number must be colored white. So if we have a black number, then its negative must be a white number. And the second rule is sum of two white numbers, they must be colored black. And these numbers, they may not be necessarily distinct. Now the first question is, we have to show that negative of white number must be colored black and sum of two black numbers must be colored white. So from these two given rules, we have to prove that negative of a white number must be colored black. So for this first part, what we'll do is, we'll suppose that n is a white number. Now if we'll add n with n, then we can write n plus n and it will be simply 2n. Now the second rule says sum of two white numbers must be colored black. So this 2n is black. Now in the question it says negative of a black number must be white. So if we'll take negative of this number, so we can say minus 2n. So minus 2n, it will be a white number. Now minus 2n is white and n is white. So if we'll add minus 2n plus n, we'll get what? We'll get minus n, and the rule number 2 says sum of two white numbers must be colored black. So that means this minus n is a black number. So that's our first part. Negative of a white number is a black number. Now for the second part, which says sum of two black numbers must be colored white. So what we'll do is, here we'll choose two black numbers. Say n and m, they are black numbers. So if n and m, they are black numbers, we know that negative of a black number is a white number. So minus n and minus m, they are white numbers. Now if we'll add them, we'll get minus n minus m. So sum of two white numbers is a black number. So minus n minus m is a black number. Now in the question again it says negative of a black number must be a white number. So if minus n minus m is a black number, then we can say n plus m is a white number. So if n and m are black numbers, then n plus m is a white number, and that's our second part, which is sum of two black numbers must be colored white. Now we'll come to the second part, which says determine all possible colorings of the integers that satisfy these rules. So one obvious condition is we can paint all the integers as red. So if all the integers are red, then they satisfy all these given conditions. Now, if suppose all the integers are not red, then some of them they'll be black, some of them they'll be white, and then others will be all red. So what we'll do is we'll assume that let n be the smallest positive integer which is not red, say which is black. So we'll consider the case when we have taken this n to be the smallest positive number which is black. Now our claim is once we decide color for this number n, then the color of all other integers, it is already pre-decided. So we have to prove this claim. So in order to prove this claim, we'll prove another result, and which is sum of a black number and a white number must be a red number. So we have to prove that sum of a black number and a white number, it must be a red number. Now we'll prove this result using contradiction. So we'll consider this first case, that suppose the sum of a black number and a white number is a black number. So we'll say we have two numbers, say n is a black number, m is a white number. Now our assumption is black plus white is black. So if n is black and m is white, then n plus m, it must be a black number. Now in part 1, we have already proved that negative of a white number must be black. So if m is white, then minus m is black. Now we'll add them, we'll get n plus m minus n. So it'll be simply n, and the sum of two black numbers, it must be a white number. So from here we can say this n, it must be a white number, which contradicts our initial condition that n is a black number. So from contradiction we can say that black plus white, it cannot be a black number. In the same way, we can prove that black plus white, it won't be a white number as well. So we can say that sum of a black number and a white number, it must be painted red. Now we'll come back to our claim, which is if the color of n is decided, then the color of all other integers, it is pre-decided. Now what we'll say is, suppose this n is 1. That is, suppose 1 is the smallest integer which is painted black. So if 1 is black, then 1 plus 1 is 2. So sum of 2 black is white. So if 1 is black, then 2 is white. Now if we'll add 1 and 2, 1 plus 2 is 3. So sum of black plus white will be red. Now 2 plus 2, sum of two whites is black. So we'll get 4 as black. And then 4 plus 1, black plus black, it will be white. So 5 is white. And then again 1 plus 5 will be 6. And they'll again be red because it is sum of a black number and a white number. So from here we can see that all the numbers which are of the form 3k plus 1, they'll be colored black. All the numbers of the form 3k plus 2, they'll be colored white. And all the numbers which are multiple of 3, they'll be colored red. Now what if we take n as 2? That is, now 2 is the smallest number which is black. Now we know that 2 plus 2 will be 4. So if 2 is black, then 4 is white. Now if 2 is black and 4 is white, then in that case 6 will be red. Now what about the color of 3? Now if 3 is black, then black plus black will be white. So in that case 6 has to be white. And if 3 is white, then 6 has to be black. But 6 is red. So it simply means this 3, it has to be simply red. In the same way, we can say this 5, it should also be colored red. So here we can say that numbers which are of the form 3k plus 1 into 2, they'll be colored black. Numbers of the form 3k plus 2 into 2, they'll be colored white, and the numbers of the form 3k into 2, they'll be colored red. And all other numbers, they must be painted red as well. So from here we can say that if n is the smallest positive integer which is not red and which is say black, so if n is black, then all the numbers which are of the form 3k plus 1 into n, they'll be black numbers. All the numbers of the form 3k plus 2n, they'll be white, and all the numbers of the form 3kn, they'll be red, and all the numbers which are not a multiple of n, they'll be painted red. And on the other hand, if we choose this number n to be white, then in that case the remaining numbers will be determined by the same rule. So here black and white, they'll be simply switched. So this is how we can determine all possible colorings of the integers which satisfy these rules. Now the next question is, you are given a regular hexagon. We say that a square is inscribed in a hexagon if it can be drawn in the interior such that all the 4 vertices, they lie on the perimeter of hexagon. Now the first question is, if a line segment has its end points on opposite edges of hexagon, we need to show that it passes through the center of the hexagon if and only if it divides the 2 edges in the same ratio. So what we'll do is, we'll say, suppose the vertices are P, Q, R, S, T, U, and suppose vertices of this square, they are A, B, C, D. Now let us take center of this hexagon as origin. Then this angle will be 60 degrees. Now suppose this length is R. Then coordinate of S will be R comma 0. P in that case will be minus R comma 0. And here it will be R cos theta. R cos 60 is simply R by 2. And then root 3 R by 2. And here it will be minus R by 2. Root 3 R by 2. This one will be minus R by 2. Minus root 3 R by 2. And this will be R by 2 and minus root 3 R by 2. Now we have coordinate of all the 6 vertices of this hexagon. Now question number A says, a line segment has its end points on opposite edges of the hexagon. Now we have a line segment which has its end points on opposite edges of hexagon. So suppose this is the line segment. Now suppose this point, it divides PU in the ratio lambda is to 1, and this point it divides RS in the ratio 1 is to mu. Then we can find coordinate of these 2 points, say E and F. Now coordinate of this point F, it will be R plus mu R by 2 upon 1 plus mu, and its phi coordinate will be root 3 R mu upon 2 1 plus mu. Now in the same way we can write coordinates of E. So this E will be minus R by 2 lambda minus R upon lambda plus 1, and here it will be minus root 3 R lambda upon 2 upon lambda plus 1. Now what we'll do is, we'll prove that if this line EF, it passes through origin, then basically lambda must be equal to mu. So if origin lies on EF, then slope of OF must be same as slope of OE. So we'll write slope of OF. So what is the slope of OF? Slope of OF will be root 3 R mu upon 2 R plus mu R by 2, and it will be equal to slope of OE, which in this case will be root 3 R lambda upon 2 R by 2 lambda plus R. We'll cancel root 3, we'll cancel this R, we'll cancel this 2, and we'll also cancel this R here. Then we can write mu upon 2 plus mu is equal to lambda upon lambda plus 2. So from here we can say lambda is equal to mu. If this line segment, it passes through center of hexagon, then it divides the two edges in the same ratio. So that's our first part. Now we'll come to the second part, which is suppose a square ABCD is inscribed in a hexagon such that A and C are on the opposite side of hexagon. Prove that the center of square is same as that of the hexagon. So what we'll do is we'll prove that this triangle AQB is congruent to this triangle CDT. Now how do we do that? What we'll do is we'll join these diagonals AC and BD. Now this AC is transversal to these two parallel lines PQ and TS. Now this angle QAC will be equal to this angle ACT. Now we know that this angle is 45 degrees. So angle QAC minus 45 must be equal to angle CAT minus 45 degrees. We can say this angle QAB, it is equal to this angle TCD. Now in the same way, using BD, we can prove that this angle, which is ABQ, will be same as this angle, which is CDT. Now AB and CD, they are sides of a triangle. So basically we can say that these triangles AQB and triangle CTD, they'll be similar triangles. AQ, it must be equal to CT, and if AQ and CT they're same, then AQ upon AP, it must be same as CT upon CS. So from first one, we can say that if line segment has endpoints on opposite edges of hexagon, and if it divides the two edges in the same ratio, it will pass through center of hexagon. So that means this AC, it will pass through center of hexagon, and also BD will pass through center of hexagon. So from here we can say that point of intersection of two diagonals of this square will again pass through center of hexagon, which is origin in this case. Now part C is, suppose the side of hexagon is of length 1 unit, then find the length of the sides of inscribed square whose one pair of opposite side is parallel to a pair of opposite side of a hexagon. So we have this square ABCD inscribed in this hexagon. Now it is given that length of this side is 1 unit. So this is 1, and this is also 1 unit, since it will be an equilateral triangle. Now we need to find length of this square. So what we'll do is we'll say, suppose this length BS, it is simply X. Now this angle will be 60 degrees. We can find length of side BC, and it will be equal to 2 times and then X sine 60, and sine 60 is root 3 by 2, so it will be simply root 3x. So value of BC will be under root 3x. Now if we find this distance it will be x cos 60, so it will be simply x by 2. So we can find AB, and this AB will be this distance, which is 2 units, minus, we have this symmetry, so this distance will be same, so it will be 2 minus 2 x by 2. So value of AB simply will be 2 minus x. Now BC and AB, their sides were square, so from here we can say root 3x is equal to 2 minus x. So from here we'll get the value of x as 2 upon root 3 plus 1, or we can simply say value of x is root 3 minus 1. Now we'll need to find length of side of the square. Length of side of the square is root 3x, and the value of x is root 3 minus 1. So it will be root 3 into root 3 minus 1. So length of side of this square will be under root 3 into under root 3 minus 1. Now this part D is show that up to rotation, there is a unique way of inscribing a square in the regular hexagon. So once we have solved this part C, we know that this square will be inscribed in this hexagon when the value of x is
root 3 minus 1. So that means this value of x, it is uniquely determined. There is no other value of x possible with which we can inscribe this square within this hexagon. So that means there is only a unique way of inscribing this square inside this hexagon, and there is no other way possible. And this is how we solve these questions.